Basically, what we're working on is how do we work with Tallahassee to make sure that we are doing the best that we can do for students throughout the state, but especially our focus being Brevard County. The good thing is that we're not speaking alone, and that a lot of the things that we're discussing are issues for districts throughout the state. So that gives us a little bit more momentum. But really what we are working on, as you see on the PowerPoint, is building that bridge to Tallahassee where we can work collaboratively with our legislators, have discussions, do a lot of education, because I'll be honest with you, a lot of the decisions that are being made, there isn't really a realization of the impact of those decisions when it comes down to the school level. And so we have a lot of work to do there. What we did in 2012 was we went through and we looked at what do we want to see happen here in Brevard. We provided a lot of information about what's going on in other parts of the country. We provided a lot of research that talked about what are the best routes for us to go in education. Our purpose really is twofold: to make sure that we're making decisions that are in the best interest of children with regards to testing, with regard to evaluation of schools and teacher evaluations, and then the second prong to that is funding. So we're requesting that the legislators hold harmless districts, students, and teachers for the first year of the new assessments. We want to have that discussion with regard to our school grades, our student retention, as well as remediation decisions. We also want to make sure that when it comes to teacher evaluations, when they are based on the new Florida assessments, we're not penalizing teachers for the results of those tests until we know the outcomes, until we know that they are going to be valid and reliable tests. We also want to make sure that our district and our school grades are not impacted by the new FSA assessments. Everything from when our schools are allowed to start to how much funding our schools receive is based on that data. And then the other element is the new district EOCs. And this one is very interesting to me because we, in December, had a luncheon with our Florida legislators. And the comment was made that you all complained that teachers were being evaluated based on students that they didn't teach. So we listened. And we gave you all of these new end-of-course exams so that they could be evaluated on courses that they do teach. That obviously wasn't what we were asking for. So we have to make sure that we're communicating clearly what it is that we're looking to get out of the changes and not allow 1,500, 2,000 EOCs to be created because of the message that we're sending. So we really want to work collaboratively on all of those issues and ensure that we're moving forward in a positive way. We also want to look at the possibility of legislating that the DOE work with districts. In other states, legislators pass legislation that is much more open, much more broad than what we see in Florida. And what happens with that is the DOE then has the flexibility to make changes along the way when we see that things aren't working. The way that we do it in Florida, we pass this very specific legislation and then we go, oh, doggone it, that's not really what we wanted to happen. But it's already in law, and getting it changed is often a challenge. So what we're asking them is, you know what, give the DOE the flexibility to work with the local districts with the understanding that the local districts know what's best. And then we can start to work on improving things and not putting everything into law where we don't have that flexibility to change things. We want to make sure that we strike an appropriate research-based balance between valid and reliable state assessment results. And I think it's important to note that we're not against assessment. We're not against evaluation. But what we are against is these out-of-control assessments and out-of-control evaluations. What we want is assessments and evaluations that really give us valuable data that allow us to know where we need to go in the future. And there are some assessments that do that. There are also some assessments that don't. And so we need to have some real strong conversations about what is of value to us at the school level to be able to help our students, what is of value for us at the school level to be able to improve our teaching without focusing on all these things that for a lot of people feel just punitive, that we're setting standards that people can't meet, that we have expectations that are in conflict with what we feel like we should be doing for our students, but yet we're doing them because the evaluation requires it. So we want to make sure that we have a nice balance there. We also want to make sure that in addition to state level assessments, that we can incorporate some local measures of student achievement when it comes to both looking at student issues of retention, remediation, those things, but also when it comes to measuring our teachers. Because oftentimes, if we can incorporate multiple metrics into what we're looking at, we get a much better picture than if we're just looking at one state assessment and basing so much on that. So we're asking the legislators, hey, you know what? Let us look at different things that are important to us. Maybe it's how we're achieving things on our school improvement plan. Maybe it's how particular groups of students are functioning. Maybe it's how we are impacting a particular issue at the school. But we at the local level know much better than folks in Tallahassee what we need to work on to get better. And so we're asking them to give us flexibility in that. We also have asked them to remove the 50% requirement on teacher evaluation. Currently, 50% of the teacher's evaluation has to be based on student data that focuses on achievement on state standardized tests. And that's problematic, especially when you look at us going into this transition period with the FSAs. So what we're asking is that they allow us to incorporate some different elements into that evaluation that might help us to achieve goals at the local level more effectively, because we can then focus on those. The biggest focus here throughout this element, this number one, is giving us back local control. We feel like we do a pretty good job at the local level on a lot of things. Can we do better? Absolutely. We can always improve. But the bottom line is, we're the ones on the front lines. We're the ones in the schools, in the classrooms, interacting with the students, looking at the data, focusing our goals, developing our strategic plan. All of that is our specialty for our district. And for someone in Tallahassee to tell us this is what you need to do doesn't seem to make sense, because every district has different challenges, different demographics, different cultures. And so we're asking them to respect us as professionals and allow us to set up something. We'll run it by the DOE. This is our plan, and let them give input. But we really want to be able to say, this is what we think is going to help us be the best that we can be. Some of the specific modifications that we are looking at, just to give you examples, one is that for Algebra 1, 30% of the student's final grade must be derived from the end of course exam. We don't feel like this works. So we're asking them, if we have to give the end of course exam, which is understandable, that you not require that 30% of the student's final grade be based on that end of course exam. There is currently an online course requirement for graduation in Florida, and we're asking them to remove that. That should not be required by law. There are some students who want to take online courses, and that's fabulous, they have that option. But requiring that by law puts a significant burden on the district, on the resources, and for some students, online courses just don't work. We're also asking them to adjust the laws regarding the remediation for high school students, and once again saying this really should be a local level decision. We can look at a student who has had all A's in reading, who has been recognized for writing, who has shown very well on district assessments. If they do poorly on a state assessment, it might just be the assessment, or it might just be that the student doesn't test well in that environment or under that pressure. And so let us make that decision. We know our kids, and let us do what's best for them. With regard to the laws addressing student assessment programs for public schools, we are asking them to take a look at the reading requirement for them to pass both the reading as well as the ELA assessment, and remove that. Because once again, these are state-based assessments that may or may not be truly measuring our students. So we want to give them the option of, sure, we'll take the assessments, but at the same time, we want to make those decisions as to whether or not our students are ready to move forward. With regard to the EOC assessments, there is currently a law that says that they must be taken online, with a few exceptions. And we're asking them to remove that from law, to allow us to make the decision and provide the opportunity for our students to take tests on paper or online if they choose, but not to require that online for the EOC. And this is problematic for several reasons. Not only does it require technology resources that we don't currently have, but in addition to that, there are some students who just don't test well. And if you ask them to take a math end of course exam, for example, online, that can be very difficult for some students. And many students, especially students who are very fluent in math, will tell you that they do much better on paper when it comes to certain subjects. So we need to have the freedom to make those decisions. When we look at laws dealing with student progression and remedial instruction, currently, if a student's reading deficiency is not remedied by the end of 3rd grade, as demonstrated by scoring level 2 or higher on the statewide standardized assessment, yada, 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 then they have to be retained. There again, we can look at students and see if they are ready to move forward. We don't have to hold them back just because they didn't do well on that test. The personnel evaluation procedures and criteria, currently the law says at least 50% of the performance evaluation must be based on student data indicating learning growth on the standardized tests. We would like for them to remove that from law as well. So really what we have done this time around compared to 2012 is we've gone in and we've said, look, these are the 2 areas that we would really like for you to focus on as far as legislative changes. These are some of the specific things that we would recommend because they've asked for that. The difference between what happened in 2012 and what's happening in 2014 is now we have a lot more people sending a very similar message. And when you have a lot of people sending the same message, that carries a lot further. We have heard on numerous occasions over the past couple of months as our legislators have started discussing things that they are hearing what we're saying. So I'm encouraged that we are in fact starting to move in the right direction. But we're just starting to move in the right direction. We want to keep that momentum going, and we want to make sure that we continue to carry that same message forward from not just Brevard County, not just the school board, but through counties throughout the state, from our superintendent's organization who is on board with this agenda, to the Florida School Board Association who is also on board with this agenda, to the Central Florida School Board Coalition, all of BASA, every organization that you can think of that's dealing with education is saying something very similar. Not exact, but very similar. And so we have an opportunity now at this particular point in time to really carry this forward and increase that momentum that we're seeing. And that really is what tonight's discussion about, is what are we focusing on, where do we need to go, and how do we get there? The second focus that I mentioned back in the beginning was on school funding. And the school funding issues that we're addressing are really to some extent much more simple than the elements around evaluation and assessment. There are a couple of things that we're asking for. We're asking that the legislators establish a dedicated funding source for PICO, and PICO is Public Education Capital Outlay dollars. Those PICO dollars used to come to the schools for capital expenditures, things like facilities, school buses, technology, and they were primarily generated from fees that we paid on home phone lines. How many of you have a home phone line still? Okay. A lot fewer than used to have home phone lines, right? So some of that funding went down, and the legislature has done some tweaking to provide additional sources for that funding. There were some years where we got no PICO funding, which means that the funding that we get for facilities, school buses, technology, all of that capital funding was coming strictly from millage in our property tax. We didn't get the additional funds. This past year, they actually did give us back some PICO funds, which was wonderful. We'll take anything that we can get. But it was not nearly the amount that we used to get for PICO. And the biggest concern, and the thing that we really want to draw attention to, is that first bullet point up there. Much of the PICO funding goes to charter schools. Now, the reason that this decision was made by the legislators is because the charter schools don't get the millage from the property tax for capital funding. And I understand that to some extent. But when I look at the fact that our public schools are struggling and we are providing $341.40 per student to charter schools, while our public schools are only getting $18.88 per student, I have a concern with that. So we've shared these numbers with our legislators. They were also surprised when you break it down for them that way, and I'm hopeful that we can make some progress on that issue. But that's one of the things that we're asking, is not only do we want to make sure that we have our funding for all of the other things that are going on within the schools, but we want to make sure that we're getting our fair share of the PICO dollars. If you look at the second bullet, it points out that if we had gotten the same per student funding on PICO dollars that the charter schools get, it would have been over $23.5 million. So that's a big issue, and something, like I said, that other districts are discussing as well. We also would like to ask our legislators to reevaluate the FTE shift. It used to be that we would get our FTE funding for the students, and that funding would stay within the district for the most part. It would go to charter schools as flow through. But what has started happening in the past couple of years, those online courses that they're requiring our students to take, the funding for those students goes to the virtual education provider as opposed to the district. The problem with that is the district is still required to provide someone to be in the classroom to oversee the students. They're required to provide a room for the students to take that online course in, because not all students have access to online course materials at home. They're required to provide all of the technology to provide those online courses. And so it really becomes a costly issue for the district when we're struggling anyway. So we're asking our legislators to give that money back to us and remove that requirement. So students who are taking online courses, we've got the funding to provide that to them. It's not an additional drain on our capital or our operating budget for the district. Previously, our students who participated in dual enrollment, the district didn't pay tuition for those students. We provided books, but we didn't pay tuition. And last spring, the legislature decided, oh, you are going to be required to provide the opportunities for dual enrollment, and by the way, you're also going to pay tuition for them, which was a significant expense for the district, and not one that we were anticipating. So that was highly problematic. And I will tell you what ended up happening as a result of that is we had to get a little bit tougher on the students that were allowed to participate in dual enrollment, which isn't good for students. So we want to ask them to lift that requirement from us so that we're not siphoning additional funding out of the district, so that we don't have to hurt students in the process to be able to meet their legislative requirements. This third element of the funding is something that is specific to Brevard and a few other counties. And that is, schools are primarily funded on property taxes. And there are districts that have very low property taxes that currently receive a supplement from the legislature to make up for the difference in what their property taxes might be if they were another district. So in essence, if our property taxes are much lower in Brevard, which they are, than other districts, the state says, well, this is what we would expect your property value to be, and based on the expectation of your property value compared to what your property value actually is, we're going to give you a supplement. We do get some sparsity supplement. We get some supplement through the impact forms that we fill out every year from our federal land. The problem is that in Brevard and about 6 or 7 other counties out of the 67 in the state, we have a significant portion of our property that is federal property, which is not taxed. So we don't collect property taxes on that, which means that we don't get money into our operational fund or our capital fund from that property. So one of the things that we are going to the legislators with this year is, you know, you already do a sparsity supplement for smaller counties that have a lower tax base. How about considering doing a supplement for districts that have a significant amount of their land that is federal land? And you would be amazed when you look at those districts that are impacted by high percentages of federal land. Some of them are districts that you would think would be very wealthy districts because they're on the water, like Brevard County, because they have nice homes around them. But what happens is, because so much of this land is federal land and isn't taxed, their students suffer because they don't have as much money coming into the district. So we are asking them, specifically for Brevard, but also for the other counties that are impacted by this large portion of federal land, to consider supplementing the monies that come into the district. And then the last issue with regard to the funding is to make sure that when they mandate things for the district that they provide funding for them. One of the interesting things, if you're not really following what's going on in the legislature, you might hear things like our governor is talking about giving us these enormous amounts of increases for student funding this year. And I hope that that comes true. It would be a very nice present. But oftentimes what comes along with those increases is categoricals, meaning that we can only spend those funds on certain things. And then the other thing that we tend to see are these mandates that tell us that we have to do things like provide all of the online testing that I mentioned earlier, and yet the funding doesn't come along for us to do that. And so we're caught in a struggle of what do we do now? We have these legislative mandates that we have to meet, but we know that meeting these legislative mandates is really going to hurt our students because we're going to have to take away from something else. So we're asking them to be cognizant of the fact that we don't have loads of cash sitting around to meet these mandates that come down. And if they want us to do things, we're willing to do so, but we need them to provide us funding so that we can do it. So what is our mission? Well, the biggest part of our mission is we want to make sure that our legislators are making child-centered decisions. And oftentimes that's not the case. If you look at the breakdown of the legislators in Tallahassee, the number of them that are educators are very, very small. Which means that a lot of times these people are making decisions on issues that they really don't understand at all because they haven't been in the classroom. They may have children, but they may not be involved to an extent where they're going to understand how those decisions really impact schools. So we're going to ask them to make sure that as they are making these decisions that they are child-centered in those decisions. And we will be more than happy to work with them and helping them to understand the impact of those decisions. But we have to be child-focused. We want to focus on the idea of bringing local control back to our schools so that we can make those decisions about what's best for our kids. And we want to make sure that we ensure laws are written with educator input. I would say with parent input as well, but that's not officially on the PowerPoint, and in the best interest of the child. We want to ensure that the impact of the laws are known, understood by our legislators, and have reasonable effective dates, because that's another catch. Oftentimes those laws go into effect in July, and we have until August or September to make them happen. Like with the dual enrollment funding that I was talking about, it caught us completely off guard and we didn't have a lot of time to react to that situation. And the big thing is we want to provide a platform where we can all collectively work together to engage with our legislators on these issues. As I said earlier, we have a lot of voices singing the same tune right now, and that's not something that I have seen. Oftentimes we tend to go off and work on our own issues. But right now we have a lot of consensus throughout the state. We have a lot of parents that are more focused on education than they have been for a very long time. Much of it centered around the testing issue. We have a community that's willing to support us in these endeavors. And there is nothing as powerful as us all marching together, and I don't mean physically marching and like banging on doors, but I mean all marching together to the same tune, sending the same message, and asking for the same things in order for us to create change. And that means working with our legislators as well, as part of that us. So really the focus of tonight is where do we go from here? A big part of this is parents and community. In truth, although I would like to think that the school board and the folks and senior staff in Viera have an enormous amount of power to get our legislators to change what they're doing. The bottom line is we're only a few. And legislators are going to listen to voters. So it has never been as important as it is at this very moment in time for us to unite as educators, as community members, as parents, to send that message to our legislators. So that's part of my reason for being here tonight, is to ask you to join us in this endeavor and let your voice be heard along with everyone else's, because that's where the power is really going to come from, when we get thousands of people sending that same message, and that's the goal. We're working with our state organizations. As I mentioned earlier, FSBA has basically the same legislative agenda. The superintendent's group has basically the same legislative agenda. All of these acronyms that you see up here, FEA, the Florida Education Association, Brevard Federation of Teachers, PTOs have been working on the issue, and parent groups that are not officially PTO but have come together to support this effort. So we really are starting to pull people together, and I personally am very excited about what we're seeing happen. But we can't be done yet. We have to keep that momentum going, and so that's my ask to you. We are working with our legislators, reminding them to act in a manner that's in the best interest of our students. We had a legislative luncheon in December where the board was able to sit down with our local delegation and discuss a lot of the education issues, and I came out of there really feeling very positive. I've been advocating for education for probably 6 years now. I've gone to Tallahassee and met with them. I've spoken with them on the phone, via email. This was the first time that I really felt like we were heard and understood, and that they got it and were willing to work with us on some of the issues. So that was exciting for me, to see that we are in fact moving in this direction, and I think we can continue to move in that direction. And of course, we want to encourage all education personnel and community members to become front runners in this message. As I said, 5 voices coming from the Brevard School Board is not going to do a whole lot. But when we unite as a community, as parents, as educators, we can really send a strong message and start to make a difference. So what can you do at this point? Well, obviously, reaching out to your legislators. Hopefully you got copies of the papers that were on the back table as you came in that has our legislative agenda, has contact information for the legislators. And one of the things that I want to point out is when we're speaking with the legislators, it's great to reach out to our local delegation, which is the people that we vote for. And we do actually this year have some really powerful people in our local delegation that can help us to make a difference in Tallahassee. The key here is if you think about how many voters vote our legislators into office. If we are a very small percentage that are sending this message, we're not going to get nearly as much attention as if we are a large percentage of voters sending the message. So we really need to work collectively to say, this is what we're asking of you.